This is Where Did the Road Go? Our aim is to explore the fringe, to be true skeptics and question openly, to investigate the paranormal, bring light to the dark corners of history, and give a voice to the shunned of science. We deal in mystery and the important questions that these subjects bring to light. What is reality? Who are we? And why are we here? Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com for a full show archive, links to all our social media, upcoming schedule, and much, much more. Now, join your host Soraya on this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I'm presenting part 8 of my discussion with Mike Cleland and Aaron Gullius on UFO history. Might be the second to last part. I'm sure we'll come up with a different variation of this to continue, considering its popularity and how much we enjoyed doing it. But, we're almost up to present day. Where Did the Road Go is now available on the Google Play Store, as well as on iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube and all that other stuff it's been on forever. It's working as of this broadcast. There is a link on the website, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And I think that's all I have for you right now. So here's UFO History, Part 8. So this is Part 8 of our UFO History with Mike Cleland and Aaron Gullius. And we're continuing this right along after Part 7, which we've never done. We usually take months and months of breaks, but we're going so good tonight, we're just going to do the next part. And we left off last time talking about the key and everything. And in 2003, Sight Unseen was published, which was Bud Hopkins' last book with his later-to-be ex-wife. And her name is escaping me.
Carol Rainey.
Yes.
There we go, Carol Rainey, yes. And I thought it was a really interesting book.
You know, I point that book to people like, you know who I point that book out to? And I don't know if I actually ever did. I might have over email or something. Is Paul Kimball is very quick to sort of like point a finger at Bud Hopkins and say like, oh, he's like just does, you know, he gets all this stuff fabricated from hypnosis, and he's just got this one-dimensional view of how the UFO abduction event takes place, and I'm not sure whether Paul Kimball has actually said those words straight, but that's the implication that I get from the way
he's been. I know Kimball pretty well, and he's been more critical. He was more critical of he was pretty critical of Hopkins. Yeah.
So, but that book is so weird. That is like all the high strangeness stuff. And what I did when I read it, and I probably shouldn't say this, but so it goes chapter by chapter, just like so Bud Hopkins will write a chapter, and then his now ex-wife Carol Rainey would write a chapter, and he would write about the UFO research he'd done they would talk about, you know, sort of cutting edge science that mimics the stuff, you know, like invisibility or mind control and this kind of things that would mimic what is taking place in the UFO contact experience. And I was completely smitten by the stuff Bud Hopkins was writing, and I just kind of glossed over the stuff that Carol Rainey, because I wanted to get right back into the other stuff. But there is some of the weirdest stories in the which I'm much more drawn to is the high strangeness stuff. There's some amazingly trippy, nonsensical stuff, which funny way, I think they've tried to force it into this, like, oh, here's cutting edge science, can kind of attempt it, you know, make this stuff seem plausible.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But I'm at peace with the total weird stuff. It felt like they were trying to make the weird stuff seem less weird.
Yeah, which I'm with you, Mike. I would much rather have people just sort of take the weirdness as weirdness and sort of.
Yeah, you can do that by skipping half the chapters in the book.
Which also, saves time.
Yeah.
So.
The subtitle on this one is Science, UFO Invisibility, and Transgenic Beings.
There is a great story about Mr. Paige that lives in the basement of the house of this UFO abductee. and this woman who's now a grown woman, and I know some people who are in the circles of that were part of the Bud Hopkins support group and stuff, and are friends with the woman that they talk about in this. I've never met her, I've never spoken with her, but they kind of roll their eyes and say, well, she's had some real experiences and she's had some powerfully strange stuff. But she talks about this guy. She's a young girl. I think this is on Long Island, and this guy, kind of this strange man, comes to the house and says, knocks on the door and says, hi, like, do you need any odd jobs done around the house? And can I live here? And they say, well, sure, you can live in the basement. So he lives in the basement under the girl's room, and they never see him eat or drink water. He always wears the same clothes. And then he would just disappear at times. And he would write these postcards that were unintelligible. Like he would go away, I'm just going to leave for some time. And then they would receive a postcard. It didn't make any sense. The postcard would be in this like gobbledygook, like nonsense. And that story, and then of Mr. Paige, was so eerie and spooky. Yeah, so that just for that story alone, though, you have to go get the book. Just even if you just read those, those 20 pages.
And don't they also talk about the infamous astronaut photograph?
Oh, I
Which one is
think
the
so.
astronaut photograph?
I think so.
Where they took the photo of the little girl in the park in England, and behind her is standing a man in full like astronaut regalia, and he wasn't there when they took the photo.
I don't know if that's in that book or not, but they do talk about some
I'm
photographic evidence stuff where it was, I think it was someone in Australia. There was a long thing about, which is very similar to that, where like UFOs were showing up in the photographs, but they didn't see them at the time. Yeah.
Is that
And there's all kinds of time warp stuff in that photograph chapter too.
the name of if it's the same little girl in a picture with a mysterious astronaut in the background? I don't know how many of those kinds of photos there are, but
right.
the Solway Firth spaceman or Cumberland spaceman from like it was like in the 60s or something like that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Early 70s, something along those. I know Jenny Randalls wrote about it in her Time Storms
Mhm.
book.
It's it's a creepy picture.
Yeah,
It's
because
super-
it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
It's
remember the name of it offhand.
yeah.
But I thought they were using that as part of their explanation on the whole photography thing and invisibility and stuff. But maybe I read Time Storms around the same time and I mixed them up. It's entirely possible.
There's certainly a long section where they talk about some photographs that were taken at a playground and I think Australia. So it's not the same story, but it sounds like a very similar photograph.
Hmm. And what was that one?
Yeah, it's been so long since I read the book. I can't
Okay,
do it. I
all
can't
right.
do it. I've reread and reread the Mr. Page thing so many times that I feel like I covered that one pretty well. Mr. Page eventually takes the girl for like little walks into the woods. It's really eerie. It's like you could kind of read that any number of ways, but
Yeah.
says, "Oh, let's go for a walk in the woods," and then then they're like, then there's missing time, and it gets it's unsettling, that story. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the Solway Firth spaceman.
Yep. Solway Firth. Yep.
Oh, I can picture the I can picture the image so clearly. I actually read something where someone said it was a person jogging behind them, and the way their elbow and their jogging shoe was like it created the illusion of a and the special sort of windbreaker they were wearing created the illusion of a spaceman, and that
Oh
theory
man,
didn't
no.
didn't work at all for me.
Yeah, it looks. I mean, it might be the fact that before I ever saw the photo, I heard it was a picture of a spaceman, but it's
It
it's
sure
sort.
looks like it's a little bit like a balloony kind of spaceman. It looks a little bit like they could, walk that spaceman, float that thing down
Yes.
on
Especially the way it's, if I remember right, it's sort of angled out to the
it's sort of
side
crooked.
Yes.
of her head, like a weird hat.
Yep,
It looks more like a spaceman than anything on Mars looks like a face.
that's true.
I will
I
say
agree. I know with the Men on
Uh,
Mars thing, I know where we're going. So
and it was taken in 1964.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's definitely a hard one to figure out. There's no I don't think any easy explanation on that. But it might have been Time Storms from Jenny Randalls that was in. It's entirely possible. Um, so yeah, and then do you know how long it was before him and Carol broke up, Mike?
I do not know, and I wouldn't say I was good friends with Bud, but I had worked with him, and we were very he was very I found him to be a very thoughtful, kind man, and I worked with him in 2008, 2007, 2008, and he died in 2011. And I called him shortly before he died, and and when I talked to him, I recognized right away that like, oh, and I had a few folks that I knew that had worked with him, and I said, you got to call this guy right now. You might not get the chance to talk to him again. So
Yeah, yeah. And well, the next event we have down here is also of that same ilk. Dr. John Mack dies on September 27th, 2004, hit by a drunk driver in London.
that is
Yeah.
so easy to say it was a. I mean, I'm on both sides of the fence at the same time of like, because I've talked to people who've researched it and say no, it was an accident. And people who knew John Mack said he was very much like walking around the streets of Boston was kind of the absent-minded professor. People were like, John, like be careful. And so he was
Right.
friends had said that's exactly the kind of thing he would do and it was the case of being in England,
Where
where if
you're looking the
the
wrong
traffic
way.
patterns,
Yep.
yeah, you look the wrong way if you're going to cross the street. So, or an American would look the wrong way if they were going across the street. So, and but that would be, and that was at the height of, that was just after he was cleared in the when he even used the term Kafkaesque trial.
Yeah, his
The witch
10-year
hunt.
revocation thing.
Yeah,
At,
when he was
Yeah.
at
taken in
Harvard.
front of
Yeah.
the and had to get a lawyer, and Alan Dershowitz, who was on staff there at Harvard, actually spoke and said, "Listen, he can't, like this is freedom of speech. He can't tell the guy what he can and can't study." And
Yeah.
but basically, like a tenured Harvard professor with the Pulitzer Prize comes out and says, people are being abducted by aliens, and you just like you could just sense that they were like, holy crap, we got to get rid of this guy, we got to shut this guy up, within the hallowed halls of that institution. And then
Yeah.
right after he died, Susan Clancy's book came out almost immediately, which was just like, and it had Harvard Press and great big letters on the front and stuff like that. So here's this woman, Susan Clancy, who comes out with a book that says like, oh, people who claim to be abducted by aliens, they're just suffering from this kind of delusional thing. Isn't it interesting that they,
Was
but,
she
and then
the sleep paralysis? Was she the one
I know
who?
she didn't, I cannot remember. I actually never read it, but
Oh, okay.
whether she passed it off to sleep paralysis at all. All it
I know.
was just so blatantly obvious that they were like, "Oh my God, he's gone. Let's get a book out right away." Like so,
Yeah. It's. I
and
mean, the thing is for me the likelihood that it was an accident it just seems more plausible that it was an accident than that somebody put a hit out on him, wait till he's in London and then hit him with a car. It just
Yeah.
it just doesn't. he he wasn't. I don't think he was threatening anybody, even Harvard, enough to justify that kind of response. Because honestly, you go to 9 out of 10 people on the street, even in academia at the time, and if you said, "Have you heard about this John Mack thing at Harvard?" and they would have said, "What? What John Mack thing?" So I know Harvard has a sort of very outsized view of its own significance and importance, but I don't know. I just
yeah, I agree. I agree. But at the same time, it is it's well, what I will say, so I can't answer the question, but I will say within the UFO community, a lot of people just take it as gospel, just as
Oh, yeah.
plain fact that he was killed.
Absolutely.
Well, and Nick Redfern has written an entire book on all the weird deaths related to people who research UFOs. There's quite a lot of them. So, I mean, I would think it was just an accident. It seems like it fits with being just an accident, but who knows what's behind all these deaths?
Yeah,
It's worth looking into, and everything like that. There were people with motives, but there's, I don't know. There's it's not like when the conspiracy theories, sort of going back to the 90s a bit, about Jim Keith, for example, that his death wasn't entirely accidental. I think the number of people in significant places of power that Jim Keith probably angered with his research and writings is probably more dangerous than Mack. So I'm not dismissing these potential assassinations of researchers out of hand, but some are more plausible than others, and I think Mack is his prominence in the abductee field is certainly a factor, but at the same time, I don't know that the people he was angering were the types of people who would have taken him out. That's
Fair
sort of
enough.
where it falls apart for me. Is he wasn't going after the sort of government, military, industrial, political figures that others do. And I'm trying to imagine a group of, for example, Harvard academics trying to arrange a hit, and it just it's amusing trying to imagine that.
And to me, he was like the mirror opposite of David Jacobs.
Yes.
He had these experiences are transformative and positive, and there's the occasional negative one, but it's how you approach the experience.
And he was actually an expert in the field that he was actually working in.
True.
Unlike
he was a trained clinical therapist. He was a medical doctor, and so he had he's the one you cannot point to and say like, oh, this guy didn't know how to use hypnosis.
Right. As far as institutions of higher education being irked by somebody embarrassing because of flying saucers, I think Jacobs is way, way, way further down the road on that than John Mack was. And I think the fact that Mack, won his dispute with Harvard over his tenure revoking over that, I think that says a lot as well. If they wanted rid of him, they could have used their system. They could have used their system and their board of trustees and all of the tools at their disposal to basically discredit him and shut him down. And that's the way to get rid of somebody like John Mack. Somebody like David Jacobs, you just sort of let them go and hope they retire soon. But it was sad because no matter what the final verdict will, maybe someday we'll know if it was an accident or if it was nefarious. Regardless, it's sad, very sad, because he was a interesting and thoughtful scholar of the phenomenon who came to it with far less ideological baggage than a lot of other researchers.
Well, I would say that also he was in a way predisposed to see a more he was friends with the Dalai Lama, and he had studied all kinds of mystical traditions, and he meditated and things like that. So there's he was predisposed perhaps to see it within that in that way. And also and I've talked to people who've worked both with Dr. Mack and who've worked with Bud Hopkins and Dave Jacobs, and the folks who've worked with John Mack said that he would get to a certain point in the research and then go deeper. And he's the one that first started doing the I'm trying to remember. I've read a lot of books and it all blurs together at some point, but it's in the book Abduction, where one of the people that he's working with, they got them so deep into hypnotic regression that suddenly they're like, where are you? And it's like, well, I'm in this other realm, and then they basically say, I'm an alien in this previous life. This is a previous life, and I'm an alien. And then I have agreed to come and reincarnate into this person's consciousness, into this person's life, to be that I am the soul within this human. And that they are, and I've done it through reincarnation. So, and then they are playing an important role, and I have chosen to take this on, as a alien being from this alternate realm. And so that was the very first, which is pretty far out stuff, and that has since become kind of commonplace in a way within the UFO research community, that people will tap into that. But that was, if I remember correctly, the very first time that showed up was in that book, in the book Abduction.
So also in 2004, After the Martian Apocalypse by Mac Tonies was published.
That book just made me care about Martian anomalies. And you know, if anybody has ever heard me complain about Richard Hoagland, you'll know that's pretty amazing. It was an incredible book, and I read it after I'd started reading Mac's blog. He had already published it once I discovered Mac and his writing. And I found a copy. I amazingly found a copy affordably, which was, after a while, a pretty difficult feat. And it was such a good case for examining these things without offering an explanation about what it might be, and without playing the conspiracy card about why NASA had been, dismissive and reluctant. It was the antidote to all of those Richard Hoagland appearances on Art Bell. It was wonderful.
And I'm not exactly sure how old he was at the time.
Not very, because he and I were almost, he was a month older than I was, and I was 27, 28.
He was born in August of 75.
Yeah.
Interesting. He was born on the day that the Viking mission launched from Florida.
Oh, that's right. I remember him saying
so
that.
yeah, he was that was very early on in the book. He says, "Yeah, that's interesting," and I'm like, "Well, that is the kind of thing that I see as interesting." It is so he would have been in his 20s.
Yeah, so 2004, right?
Yeah.
So he would have been 29.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is so presumptuous for a 29-year-old to just write, basically saying, in his calm and non-hysterical a way, is saying, like, well, NASA really isn't, like, doing their job. They need to have, archaeologists on the staff looking at the data that's coming back from the rover, as well as the satellite imagery that's coming back. And so that why, if we saw these images in Egypt or North Africa, we would send in a team of archaeologists.
Exactly.
And they're not doing that. And he basically, so I just thought that was so powerful that he would say that. But the book I bought used from, like, Amazon or something like that. When I got it home and opened it, it was a signed copy. He had signed it.
Oh, man. Nice.
And I was actually pretty close with Mac. I talked to him a lot on the phone. So
Yeah, we knew each other online. We'd correspond online. And I was always like, man, I'm gonna get to Kansas City and meet you. And he's like, yeah, come on out. And I never got around to it.
And I never interviewed him, and that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know he existed until after he died. So
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. So that 2009 is when he died. So
Right. And so, and the thing is, after the Martian Apocalypse, that's kind of the way I looked at it. It's like, okay, these look like they could be something. Why aren't we looking at it?
Yep.
Let's okay, it might be natural, but what if on the slightest chance it's not?
Right.
That could be the biggest news we would ever know of.
Yeah. If like Mike reported Mac saying, if we saw this in Egypt, if we saw this under, on the ocean floor, there would be no stopping archaeologists from examining this. Yeah. And I can't remember if I read it in the book or if I heard it on various interviews with him, but sort of, he talked a lot about the culture of NASA and the conflict between the I can't remember the name. I know I don't have this straight, but the Jet Propulsion Lab people and the manned spacecraft people, the probes versus the manned exploration people. There's an entire institutional political structure in NASA, just like there is in every other institution. And I know he laid at least some of the blame for this on that. Nobody wants to go out on the limb when they could lose face and lose work and lose prestige to the other wing of the organization.
Right. And then he published. Well, actually, no. That was the only book of this type he published while he was alive.
Yeah, he had a book of science fiction short stories.
Yeah.
Illuminated Black.
Illumined Black or Illuminated Black. Yeah.
Illuminated Black. Yeah.
It says illumined black here.
There's some letters. It's it's Jenny Randall's. It's a test for Jenny Randall to.
There we go.
Yeah.
And he died on October 22nd of 2009. And what did he die from?
He died of an undiagnosed heart ailment.
Yeah.
And I had talked to him before, and he was in the hospital. He was working at. He used to work at Starbucks as a barista, and it was just amazing. He's the most brilliant guy I've ever interacted with, really. And then he took on a job doing I don't know, some crappy job doing whatever, where they solicit calls at a call center or something like that. And then he passed out at work, and then he went to the hospital, and they said it might be your heart, and they did a bunch of tests, and nothing came out conclusive, and then within a month he was dead.
Wow.
So they don't actually know what it was. And this is another one where there's a lot of conspiracy stuff, and he was not pushing any buttons. I don't think in the
No.
It's one thing to if someone's, my sense is that the people that they're after are going to, if there is, it's when you're tabbling and on back in military stuff or government stuff, and if you're talking about consciousness and the really far out stuff,
they're just
you're off limits.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he and that was I was driving in southern Utah when that happened, and I heard the news. So
yeah, and just sort of undiagnosed heart failure, probably some sort of congenital, thing that had been wrong with his heart for a long time, and it just, I've since Mac died from that, I've known 2 or 3 other people around the same age that's happened to. They
really,
they have some fatigue or fainting. They go to the doctor. They say, yeah, some sort of heart arrhythmia thing. We'll check into it, and they die in their sleep, or they die in their sleep, and then an autopsy shows a kind of just some sort of strange thing they were born with that was basically a ticking time bomb. And
so when he died, and this is my understanding, so they he was found in bed, and on his desk next to his bed, he had actually, and I talked to him about, he said, yeah, the last little bit for working on the Cryptoterrestrial book, I just got the last little bit to do, and he had actually printed in paper and was making the final edits with red pen. So that was found near his bed. There was some stuff that the editor, Patrick Weege from Anomalous Press, had to piece together a little bit, but for the most part, the book was entirely done. So this is a very strange, if this was written a screenplay, I wouldn't buy it, but this is, that the author writes this powerful, brilliant book, makes the final edits in red pen and paper, and then dies, as far as we know, peacefully in his sleep, is remarkable to me.
Yeah, and he was just a fascinating guy, and Paul Kimball has sort of taken custodianship of his writings and has published, I think, two volumes so far of sort of the collected blog posts from his Post-Human Blues blog, and I wrote the introduction to the first volume, which has very little of the weird stuff. There's a lot of political commentary. It was during the run up to the Iraq War. He's extremely frustrated at living in suburban Kansas City, and I said this in what I wrote in the foreword, but one of the things that connected me to Mac is we were both, guys from the Midwest who were months apart in age, who went to, similar types of small liberal arts colleges, who, I was sort of like Mac is some sort of man, that could have been my life, not doing what I wanted for a living, but having the brain space to speculate on all this awesome stuff. And I sort of, I was like, it's like, we've been in the same town, it would have, he's the kind of guy that he's the kind of guy I would have hung out with like my whole life, and it was, and just even getting acquainted with him just online, it was like, yeah, he's one of my people, and it was just so sad that he's gone.
Yeah. And tell people a little bit about the cryptoterrestrials, the theory there.
It's, oh man, calling it a theory is somehow more giving it too much credit, but somehow underselling
Thought
it.
experiment.
It's thought experiment
That's the perfect word.
thought
Yeah.
experiment, meditation. It's, there's this idea he had, and people are like, well, he really believed that. I was like, no, he didn't believe that, but he was playing with it. That maybe one explanation for some of the encounters people have had is that there is a race of intelligent beings indigenous to Earth that have an evolutionary track that paralleled humanity, but for whatever reason, there are very relatively few of them, and they have found a way to stay hidden and stay out of our way, but occasionally our paths cross. And it's and the book, The Cryptoterrestrials, building on some of the things he'd written in his blog and expanding on those, explores this idea and shares some of the strange encounters that happen. And one of the things that sort of fuel this idea is that, like we've said quite a few times over the course of these conversations, that these supposed aliens from another planet behave an awful lot like us, and they act in ways that we can interpret and understand, whether it's the nature of our scientific experiments and only we're the subjects, not the scientists, or just the idea
Facial
that
expressions.
facial expressions, biology, the whole hybridization thing. I mean, just genetically, I don't know how that works if they're not connected to us somehow biologically.
Right.
But it sort of grew on that. And it was a brief book, a slim book. It's a book I reread every October. It's,
Oh my word. Okay. And yeah, and yeah. And my illustrations, I did the illustrations.
The drawings are great. At one point, I misplaced my hard copy, and so I bought the Kindle version. So now I have both. So no matter where I am, I can read it. It's wonderful, and he did some interviews about it that were really good and really interesting. There was an interview on Radio Mysterioso with Greg Bishop,
and Paul Kimball.
and Paul Kimball. Yeah, the two of them together. And then I think when he was working on the Cryptoterrestrials sort of hardcore, he did a solo interview with Greg where he did some readings from what he was writing. I'm not sure if that one's still available.
And he read aloud. He read the very first chapter there, which is a short little chapter, and it was comparing and contrasting his cat.
Yes.
So let's say his cat playing with a laser pointer with his cat, right? So this is a metaphor for the UFO experience. The cat, being cat-like, has to follow the little dot, not knowing that the person, the cat is not aware that there's a person in the room with a little toy, with a little laser pointer, a little, that's creating this dot. So the cat is completely focused on the dot while there's someone else just messing with the cat in the room, and which is a brilliant metaphor, right? So we're looking at the UFO, we're looking at the shiny flying saucer, but what's real? Where's the person in the room with, or in the existence with the laser pointer? Now, I wrote a very similar essay. There's a bunch of stuff that this Mac and I, like, there's just got kind of weird at a certain point. I wrote an essay before I had ever heard of Mac Tonies in November of 2006. I first heard of Mac Tonies when he was interviewed in 2007 on Tim Binnall's program. And I remember I got up one morning, I drank a cup of coffee, and I'm like, oh my God, I got this great idea. I'm just going to write this essay. And poof, I just wrote this essay, which is not how I usually write. And it was an essay where I compared and contrast playing with my cat with a piece of string. and the cat doesn't know that I'm holding the other end of the string. Now, if you read these two essays, and I actually took the audio of Mack and my own reading of my essay and played them side by side, they're plainly making the same point. He's a much better writer than I am, but and now this is actually Red Pill Junkie figured this out. Now later, after this is okay, I'm jumping around a bit, but when Mack died, I was really crushed. I was really heartbroken, and it's like whatever. It was emotional for me. It was bad. I was, whatever. There was the shining star of like the core group of my, like a close friend it was bad. So I had talked with Mack about doing the illustrations. I got a hold of Patrick Weege and said, I want to do these illustrations. Mack and I had talked about it. Patrick Weege said he'd already talked to Mack's mother, that there was some illustrator out there. He found me now. So I received the document of the book, and I printed it up on paper. I put it in a 3-ring binder. And I was so nervous about reading this thing. I was so nervous. I had a deadline. They wanted these illustrations, and I was putting it off just because I was nervous to read it. It was just a hot button thing. So there was a day I was like, damn it, I gotta read this thing. So I'm sitting alone in the house. The house is quiet. I've got a cup of tea. I got my reading glasses on, and the book sitting on the couch. It's on the coffee table. I open it up and I read The Cryptoterrestrials by Mack Tonies. At that moment, there's this audible clunk, and the video cassette, not the video cassette. I had a CD player that had one of those cassettes where you'd stack like 6 CD players. This is kind of 90s technology.
6 CD player,
yeah. So and it ejected. It was off. At that moment when I opened the thing and read The Cryptoterrestrials by Mack Tonies, it ejected like the cassette. And I wrote a blog post about that. And Red Pill Junkie, who's been on your show, I'm sure, said that it's like that was a laser beam. And Mack wrote about a laser beam, and you wrote about a string. And I have also written a book about like lightweight camping, and I'm all into this like complete Luddite thing, and so it just seems so perfect. Mack, like the futurist, was playing with a laser. Me, the Luddite, is playing with a piece of string, and then it is a laser beam. Like, it's the closest laser beam to me in the room was in that CD player, and that was what made that clunking noise so anyway, that was, and I have no explanation. That thing had never done that ever before. That was the VCR, not the VCR, the CD player was turned off, and then it just ejected that thing right at that moment.
I remember, I think the first time I'd read, some blog stuff that Mack had written, and I'd read some that that Paul Kimball had written, and I'd started listening to Radio Mysterioso, and I heard the interview with Greg and Paul and Mack, and I think it was like Mack's first interview anywhere. And I remember it was May of 2006, and I listened to it driving from Cimarron, New Mexico, down to Roswell. We were out there, and I'd escaped my other duties for 2 days to act, and told my wife, "Okay, you do your work thing here. I'm taking the rental car and I'm driving to Roswell." And I just remember listening to Mack and Paul and Greg talking about all of this stuff, the state of ufology and Mack's ideas and everything, while I'm driving across the desert to Roswell. And it was, it got me really back into all of this stuff way more than I had been. And it was just, the laser pointer and or string, metaphor with the cat. And as you were explaining, Mack's laser pointer analogy, I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, it's Plato's allegory of the cave, right? It's
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
the allegory of the cave, but in a way that, you don't need to take a philosophy class to really grasp, right? So it's just a brilliant, whether you're talking about it or Mack was talking about it, just a brilliant way of looking at this phenomenon. We are focused on the effects without knowing there's a cause behind it. And what happens to us when we realize there's another layer beyond that.
Yeah.
All right. And I plan on doing a whole show on Mac Tonies at some point.
Outstanding.
Yeah, get Paul on
because
that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
that was the plan. But you can get all of his stuff still. It's all in print, right?
Except illuminated black.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think after the Martian apocalypse, I think a Kindle a Kindle version was released. So that is much more. Yeah, there's a Kindle edition for $11. So and the paperback has come down in price. I remember at one point it was hundreds of dollars to get used paperbacks of it. But yeah, it's still available, and Cryptoterrestrials is as well.
All right. So let's move on to someone a little more controversial in the 2000s. Stan Romanek.
Oh, jeez.
I've met Stan a few times. Now I'm going to be so I've met Stan a few times. So I can't say that I know the guy. I would talk to him at conferences, right? So I saw him a bunch of times. I've seen his presentation at conferences. I'm going to be very cautious how I say this. Like it felt like he had a speech kind of, like he would give it, you'd ask him a question, you could tell he'd been asked that before, and he would give you the answer. Very gregarious, likable guy. And so what I ended up doing, this wasn't scientific. This was just because he was kind of mobbed. So wasn't like I did it on purpose, because he was kind of mobbed at these scenes. I would talk to other people around him and say like, "Oh, you know Stan, right?" And it's like, "Okay, what's up with Stan?" It's like, "Oh my God, I had this totally strange experience with Stan." And then they would tell me this really weird thing, like I talked to the woman who claims to have had his alien hybrid children and how they met, and she's a very, very believable person. And so, and I talked to, some of the, like talked to MUFON investigators who'd studied him and stuff like that. Like, yeah, well, this is what happened to me. And so everyone around him had these very strange stories. He writes in his book. I talked to the investigator who researched in his book. He tells about like, oh, I was driving to the Skywatch thing at this park in Colorado, and as I was driving, this thing was hovering right above my car. It was this glowing orange red sphere, and I pull in and I'm totally freaked out because this thing is, as I'm driving, it's hovering right above my car, and I pull in and everyone in the park sees it, and then I talked to the MUFON investigator who studied it and said, yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's exactly how it happened. I interviewed everyone at the park, and they all saw him pulled in with this glowing sphere above his car. So, yes, I agree that his claims are outrageous at times, but also the people around him are telling these strange stories, and I can't imagine they're all lying. So whatever's going on there, I think there's a real core story to Stan Romanek, and that there's and that he's I just want to say, I think he's got a way about him, and I would say he's done some things that have irked me, because I feel like I'm in his shoes in a way, because I feel like I've had some of these similar experiences. So when someone who claims abduction stuff says things, kind of, I don't want to say, he says stuff out of line sometimes, and it drove me crazy. Now there's also the issue of the being arrested for. Actually, he was never arrested. I don't think. I think he was. Oh, it never went. He was arrested, but it never went to. It went to trial, and he's never served any time for child pornography.
The trial is actually scheduled for this August.
Oh, is it? Okay, because I know that there was a detective who had been arrested, if I'm my understanding, I might be getting some of this wrong, for falsifying evidence, and that was the arresting officer in his case. So anyway, it's a very messy, ugly thing, that whole thing. So so I'm leaning on the side of, it's a messy story, but I trust that there's a core story with Stan Romanek's experience, and maybe the stuff in his book, how accurate is it? I don't know. The stuff in his book, which I've read, is no more far out than what's been written in other stories by abductees. But yeah, I think he's an easy target in a way, because because he has that sort of pat answer sometimes, and I am very skeptical of the alien in the window footage.
And there was I remember something about an implant. He said it was some like network show, and he said, "Oh, I've got an implant," and then
It was ABC Primetime.
and then it's like, "Well, can we do a test?" Oh, the implant disappeared. Stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that's exactly the kind of thing. Yeah.
And there was a 2015 video interview on the Peter Maxwell Slattery show. Romanek admitted faking the strange movement of objects that occurred during a 2014 interview.
Yep. Okay. So
stuff like that. Just it's if I'm
he
looking
sets
for
himself up. Yeah. So
if I'm looking for credible experiencers to pay attention to, he doesn't really make the list.
I know Peter Maxwell Slattery. I've spoken with him at length. He's in the book. He has owl experiences. He's got, in my opinion, he's an experiencer who's had some real stuff happen to him. Young guy from Australia, completely. I don't want to say egoless. That's the wrong way to say it. But I mean, he just says it straight up. And so Peter Maxwell Slattery is an interesting character and I've talked to Peter. I should be careful what I say, but I think that he's probably said it aloud. But Peter Maxwell Slattery says that he remembers seeing Stan on board ships, and I've talked to a few people who have said that. So this is, I mean, that's like that he said it doesn't mean it's true, and that doesn't. I mean, that's not going to convince But for me, all I can do is say that I'm convinced there's a core story at the heart of this Stan Romanek thing, and there was a little episode where he flicked a pen. It's very obvious. You can see it very clearly, and that was in a original interview with Peter Maxwell Slattery, which was done on YouTube. You can see it twice. He flicks. One time it's a memory stick. One time it's a pen, and in the moment he's saying like, "Oh my God, that was like some paranormal forces and stuff." But Peter Slattery goes from Australia, comes to America, visits Stan Romanek, interviews him. The next interview is side by side on the couch, and it's a very strange story. It's a very strange story. I mean, obviously he's faking that one event, clearly faking it. But I still stand by the fact that I suspect strongly that there's a core set of experiences that to the Stan Romanek story.
And the boo video would be the video of the alien in the window, I'm assuming.
I'm very skeptical of that.
And it says a video expert consulted by Romanek claimed that the boo video would have cost $50,000 to fake. A Denver paranormal claims investigation group, the Rocky Mountain Paranormal Research Society / Warning Radio, claims to have reproduced the video for about $90.
I think
he also failed a lie detector that George Norrie suggested he take, and he claimed that he had medical conditions that prevented a lie detector test from working on him.
Yep. I mean, it's a mess. His case is a mess. Yeah, I agree.
He also claims he was set up by Norrie to fail.
I don't think Norrie would set him up to fail, but Norrie would set him up to
do well. Yeah,
to do well. Yeah, Norrie would love that kind of thing.
And spin off a web TV series about it. The thing is, I mean, and his legal issue aside, because that's the courts will sort that out. Just like I said before, you got somebody like Whitley Strieber, who's sort of at the center of this, sort of cloud of weirdness for a good chunk of his life, and sort of groping for ways to explain it in ways that are helpful to people. I think there are also cases of people who could maybe perhaps like Romanek, who are surrounded by weirdness and weird things sort of glom onto them, and the way that they sort of cope with it is this is an opportunity to sort of go on the make and, not be entirely honest with it. I mean, for all his faults, I've never gotten the impression that Whitley Strieber has been, actively deceptive about anything. But people who are exposed to the strange, respond differently, and it's not always in a way that is helpful to them or those around them.
And like a lot of contactees, they may have had a core experience and then just ran with it afterwards.
Yep. You start going down a road where you say this one thing, you start out with this is what happened to me, and then it sort of builds, and you get this accretion of myth and hoax around it. And in this day and age, it's much easier to have those be exposed.
The thing is, and I addressed this actually in the last podcast I put up, which was this woman who's a listener telling us her stories that she's all these experiences she had. But when I put up the Jeff Ritzmann interview, which ended up being 3 parts, some people were like, "Well, I can't believe all this weird stuff would happen to one person."
And I'll jump in. I'll say that, like, if I'm doing interviews with folks and people tell me a one-off, like, oh, I had this one weird experience, like, I'm very skeptical.
Yeah.
People tell me they've got dozens and dozens of weird experiences. I trust them more in a way.
And I think the one-off can happen. It doesn't seem like Travis.
I don't trust him. That came out poorly. So
the Travis Walton incident. It seems like he had one encounter, and it doesn't seem like he faked it. I believe he actually had this experience, but it doesn't seem like anything else followed it.
When I've seen Travis speak and people raise their hand in the audience at the end of his talk and say, "Listen, have you ever had any other experiences?" And he said, "If I've had other experiences, I wouldn't tell anyone."
Interesting.
So, and I mean, and here's someone who, had what I consider a genuine experience. He was gone. He was missing for those days. He was gone. And he, his life was basically ruined because it was no choice of his. There was already a media circus in place when he, arrived back, let's say, he returned, the media circus was already in place. So he was, 2 things happened. He was abducted by aliens, let's say, and that he was subjected to sort of demonization in the press, back to back, overlapping.
So I tend to look at the people who have had numerous experiences as the ones who are more likely genuine, because I don't think people expect that. I think people who are going to fake it are going to fake one main experience.
Yeah, like an alien in the freezer.
Right, exactly.
Was that a Bigfoot in the freezer? I thought it was Bigfoot.
There was a Bigfoot. Yeah. We had the screaming alien in the freezer there. We talked about last time.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name.
Jonathan Reed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Where he shot the alien.
Oh,
that killed
yeah,
his
I didn't
dog.
follow that one. Yeah, there was another one. There was a case in which Mac Tonies and I talked about, which was super eerie, and I think it was in Kentucky rather recently, so it would have been in the mid 2000s, where there was a screaming that the police were called into, and they couldn't find the source of this. Help me, screaming. They were like walking through the woods and trying to find the source of this, and it was coming seemingly from nowhere.
Huh. Interesting.
And that was used as a subplot or a tiny plot element, let's say, in Whitley Strieber's book, The Greys.
Also in 2009, The Fourth Kind movie came out. And of course, this is one of these movies they build as based on real events. And they put it to the point where they had Mila Jovovich on one side as the actress, and they were claiming to show the real footage on the other side of the woman being regressed, and none of it was real, not an iota of it.
And I have no problem at all with a publicity stunt for a low grade horror film. I think that's that's William Castle stuff. That's thumbs up, more power to you. And the problem was that the movie was just plainly a sort of a schlocky horror film with
it was awful.
Yeah, it was bad. Yeah, but and now what does happen to me is you write a book about owls and UFOs, and everyone brings that movie up because it did have owls in it, which in my opinion traces directly back to Whitley Strieber's book Communion.
Yeah.
And
and they connected the whole ancient alien thing at the end as well.
Because they were speaking that ancient language. That's right.
Yeah, they were speaking in Sumerian and stuff. And I remember hearing George Norrie interviewing Linda Moulton Howe, and he brought up the movie as if it were real, and Linda had to stop and go, that was a fake movie, George. And he's like, really? But it said it was based on real events.
Oh my gosh.
Good. That's like right on for Linda Moulton Howe. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But I think a lot of people kind of
Still
grabbed
do.
onto that.
Still do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still do.
I get it all the
As
time.
if this is
People ask
really
me about
based
it.
on something.
Yeah. It's like,
But and it was such a bad movie.
Oh,
At least
Abigail
it could have
Tyler.
done as
That's
be
her
a
name. Yeah.
good movie.
Abigail Tyler.
yep. Mia
Jovovich,
Jovovich. Yeah.
who usually does good stuff. I think the majority of her stuff is generally pretty decent.
Well, I mean, that had a good cast in that movie. I can't remember there was but it was a crummy movie. It was a schlocky horror film. It had a great publicity stunt, which
Yes.
that's the history of bad movies with great publicity stunts is, like I'm all for it. Like that's right out of the Tingler where they had the seats electrified in the movie. So when Vincent Price, the 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 everyone had to scream. That was the only way you could get the Tingler from not getting into your body, and then people would scream in the audience, and the chairs were electrified, so everyone gets shocked. So that's right up there with that. So.
And I guess the final thing we'll deal with tonight, Bud Hopkins' death, which was August 21st of 2011. And we touched on it earlier when we were talking about Bud. And what did Bud die from?
But head cancer.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
How old was he when he died?
80.
Yeah.
It just turned 80. And I'm good friends with Peter Robbins. Peter Robbins had worked with Bud for years and years. And I was very close to Bud. And, Bud would basically say, like, I wanna make it to 80. So he did, and died shortly after that. That was very sad. Very sad. I knew a lot of folks who had worked with him. He had hypnotized me at one point. I laid on his bed, and he put a blanket over me on his bed and sat next to me and hypnotized me. So very little came out of that session that I hadn't already sort of written about, and the memories were very clear. But very sweet guy. Now this is also, he lived in New York City on 16th Street, and right around the corner was a classic sort of Greek diner, which are in the 80s, 70s, for like up until about the 90s, those started disappearing and being replaced by more hipster things. But I went to this diner with him and sat with him and ate. I had a grilled cheese sandwich, and he had the same thing. He knew everyone in this diner. It was just really remarkable. It's kind of New York City scene. And he told some stories that I'd never, that hinted, not hinted, I mean, he very clearly had a deeper view of the subject matter than had shown up in his written work. And he was very aware of his place as the spokesman for the UFO abduction lore. He was very clear that he was the sort of go-to person. He was the on-camera guy that they would call, and he took that responsibility very seriously and wouldn't stray from a sort of from a an idea. Like, he didn't stray from that. And when you talk to him in person, he had a much deeper and more nuanced way of framing the issues from all his work, though he did not, that we wouldn't see that very clearly in his book. Sight Unseen, you saw a little more of that. So so very interesting, remarkable, soft-spoken guy.
Go on.
One of the things about Hopkins that sort of differentiated him maybe a little bit from some like David Jacobs was at times, I think later on, he would acknowledge that, yeah, all the attention that this stuff gets, this might influence what people are saying and what people are experiencing, but then he, through his expertise, he's able to filter through that. I remember David Jacobs, he spoke at my college back in our history club advisor was like big X-Files fans, like, hey, let's get David Jacobs in here. So brought David Jacobs in, and I asked him, so if people are hearing you talk about alien abductions, doesn't that influence what people think about alien abductions, or if they see it on TV? He's like, absolutely not. Nope. Absolutely not, because you can go to darkest Africa. I think he actually said darkest Africa, and I'm like,
Oh, that's like something from
gosh.
Mhm.
Welcome to 1942. And said you can go to Africa, and you'll find just the same abductees and you do in Philadelphia. And I was thinking at the time, I was like, I really doubt that. I have a hard time believing it's the exact same experience. But Hopkins was a little more nuanced, I think, than Jacob. Well, a little more nuanced than Jacobs is a low bar, but it's
Now, I also feel like David Jacobs has done some real research and done
he has.
some hard work. So I think it would be a mistake. Jeff Ritzman would say, take David Jacobs' book, throw it in the trash can. Okay, or
Yes.
his books, all of them. Just
Yeah.
you cannot. And I would say, take David Jacobs' books and read it, knowing full well that he has placed his own filters. He has his own filters in place, and proceed with caution from there, because I think there's
Mm.
some stuff in there, those books, that I have, and I think that's true of anyone. I think that's true of John Mack's books and my
Sure.
book and Whitley Strieber's books. I mean, all of us are coming to this with a preconceived
Yep.
idea, and we're none of us are objective. We're completely subjective, and the problem
Well,
is that Dave Jacobs says he's subjective and is very objective. Did I do that right? I think I got it in the
Other
right
way
order.
around,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Says
good.
he's
Yeah,
objective, yeah.
yeah.
But all of us are subjective. It's just the way, our experiences are all different. The way we look at things are all different, and the way
Absolutely,
we
yeah.
think are different. So everything's always going to be subjective to some degree.
Yeah.
But you, Mike, walk in and say, look, this is really subjective. This is just the way I'm seeing things. And
And
someone like David Jacobs doesn't.
yep. But at the same time, like, I've been to his house and I've like stood in his office, and let me tell you, it is floor to ceiling cassette tapes of
Mm.
hypnotic regressions. Like, man, it means one thing to say that, when he says, I've done a lot of hypnotic regressions. It's another thing to stand in his office and see, thousands of them, stacked up like one after another. It's it's shocking. Yeah. So he's been doing hard work. He's come to conclusions that I don't agree with.
Right.
Though,
Now,
keep going anyway. So I'm sorry.
now it looks like he was married to Carol Rainey for about 10 years. He divorced her in 2006. And it was around the time he died or was dying that she started speaking out against him.
Yep.
And that certainly was not pretty.
No, that
Nope.
was
That was
unpleasant.
I mean, that was a different category of mean. That's like mean in all capital letters, italicized, bold print. Yeah, that was unsettlingly mean.
And
And she
in
might have
your
made some
book,
valid points, and she saw some things from the inside, and I mean, I have no doubt that Bud Hopkins was at the forefront, right? He had no one ahead of him to say,
yeah,
like, oh, how did this guy do it? How did he conduct his research? He didn't have that. He was making it up as he went along, and and then to sort of play Monday morning quarterback and say, well, he did this wrong and he did this wrong in his research and got these things wrong, um and so so it just seemed like, she's, I don't know, it just felt very mean. And at the same time, she may have made some valid points, but it just, to me, that just gets in the fog of her it just seemed like vindictiveness. It comes out poorly. Yeah.
you mentioned in your book actually Ann Strieber saying something about Bud.
Okay, this is something I'm very cautious to talk about, just because it does. She's not here to defend herself. I've talked
Sure,
with it.
sure.
So in the book, uh, Anne Strieber claims. Excuse me. I'll trace back a little bit. Anne Strieber was interviewing a husband and wife team who wrote a book called Aliens in the Backyard. Rob and Trish McGregor, and have you had them on your show ever?
I have
They're
not.
great. They're great. You should get them on. They're amazing. So, and during that interview, Anne sounded very poor. She sounded very weak. Her voice was faulty and shaky and kind of warbling, and she was a little, she wasn't her normal self. She had been co-hosting for Whitley Strieber's podcast series for a long time, and often had a very pleasant way about her. She had a very engaging way of being in a conversation, very much like you could, very informal. And then in this thing, she was a little shaky, and you could hear it. And she at one point said that Bud Hopkins, like, all I can do is, you can listen to this and go back, and I think you'd have to become a member of the Whitley Strieber site or the Unknown Country site. She said that Bud, while hypnotizing women, had raped them, and you can hear the pause in that where both um, Robin Trish McGregor were really caught off guard, and it was shortly thereafter she had an aneurysm in her brain and went into a coma. So I'm not like a medical professional, and so my sense is that you could very clearly hear that something was wrong. And she sounded, I don't want to say she sounded like someone after a stroke, because that's not right. But she did not sound like her normal self. She made an outrageous claim, which I don't believe. And then also I would say that Bud and Whitley had a very open feud in the UFO community. The book Communion came out at the same time as Intruders.
Yes.
Bud's book Intruders came out roughly at the same time as Whitley's book, and there was a lot of tension and around that, and I can't address that now because I really don't know the inside scoop. And I've also heard, I will say straight up, I heard Bud talk about Whitley, sitting on the couch, me and him. He talked about Whitley. He did not do whatever he did. He was no big fan of Whitley, and that was very clear to me, and that was, so that's no news to anyone in the community. But that she would say that. Now, in the story, this is, I don't know if I have time to go into this, but in the actual story is I had a wildly powerful set of synchronicities all clustered together involving an owl, me seeing an owl backlit by the sun while listening to my iPod on a bicycle. And I was overcome with a profound feeling of forgiveness. Leading up to that, I had heard that interview. I was angry at Anne. I saw this owl backlit by the sun while listening to Anne Strieber talking to me on a podcast that she had recorded some years earlier, 4 or 5 years earlier. And I was, the sensation of forgiveness was real. It was palpable. It happened. And so I don't know where to begin. So there's an awful story that ends with a beautiful story. Oh, and that event of forgiveness happened. I saw the owl backlit by the sun while on a bicycle, listening to Anne Strieber talking to me on a podcast I got on an iPod. I've 5,000 things on the iPod. That shows up as I'm listening, as I'm seeing an owl backlit by the sun.
Well,
that
let
all
me
took
ask you
place. Hold up, that all took place while I found out when I got home, while Anne Strieber was in surgery for her brain. Her brain was open when that happened. Her skull was. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: did Carol Rainey ever make claims like that?
I do not think Carol Rainey ever had made claims like that.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but I mean, if she had, that would be the kind of thing I would know.
All right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I remember when the whole that I didn't hear I didn't know about the interview and how it, but I just reading on the internet. Anne Strieber said, "What about Bud Hopkins?" And I went to the page and Strieber, he didn't say that the thread of comments underneath the interview, people were complaining about her accusations against Hopkins, and Strieber said something like, he didn't really say anything about the accusations, but he says, well, it's Anne's prerogative and her privilege to express the opinions she expresses. And I just remember thinking, this isn't really an opinion. This is an accusation, and it was, but, I went back and listened to it, months later, and she just does not sound well at that point. Something was off.
Yeah, and I've had breakfast with Anne and Whitley. They were a remarkably tight couple.
Mm-hmm.
They were very, very pleasant and peaceful to be in the room with together. They were, they had a great chemistry between them. So, yeah, and that I wrestled with putting that in the book, that excerpt in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, should I put it in there? And I asked Whitley. I emailed him and I said, Whitley, here's the entire thing. What do I do? Do I publish this? He sent me a 2-line thing, came back in a single email. He said, of course.
Nice.
So,
yeah.
All right. Well, this will conclude our part. What were we up to? 8?
8. We're up to 8.
Yes. Up through 8.
So we should have one more coming for people.
Yeah.
I think we can get through the rest of them. However, if we have missed stuff, and I'm sure we've missed stuff, and you're listening to this going, why haven't they talked about whatever? Drop us a line. Let us know, and we'll include that in the next one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you guys got coming up? Anything people should know about? Mike, we'll go to you first. Okay, Aaron, you first.
Aaron, go first.
What am I doing? I am at I'm appearing at a conference, the East Coast Paracon in Halifax, Nova Scotia, the first weekend in August. Kimball is one of the people who's on the committee organizing it. It's the second annual East Coast Paraconference out there, and I am going to be talking about the Men in Black. So
nice.
some Men in Black stuff. So if any of you are within shouting distance of Halifax, come on out. Looks like there's going to be some neat stuff. Greg Bishop is on the agenda as well, and Kimball's going to be there. And there's going to be some. It's one of these great conferences that just runs the gamut from Men in Black through psychic readings to ghost hunting activities and things like that. So,
awesome.
really eclectic. So, call your friends in the Atlantic time zone and tell them to head up there.
And Mike?
I am trying to promote the book, which has been out for 7 months now, the Owl book, The Messengers, and still trying to push that as much as I can and trying to eat, it's work. I went for 3 years without really much of an income working on that thing. I'm working on a follow-up book, which is stories that were too long to fit in the original book. So the working title is The Companion to the Messengers.
Oh, nice.
Or Stories from the Messengers. So
nice.
Longer format stories, which I actually sent one essay, curiously enough, relevant today, which is being recorded on Kenneth Arnold Day. I sent Aaron, said, hey, can you read this?
Oh,
You're like a college professor. Like, how, like, how is this? Actually, I wanted, because you were in one of the footnotes. I was like,
oh, yeah.
Hey, yeah. So I was like, did I get this right? Am I like out of line here? So, yes. So it was an essay on Kenneth Arnold, where he, curiously enough, has a pet owl. And that was kind of the starting point. And then a lot of weird stuff happened to Kenneth Arnold, beyond just seeing shiny objects over Mount Rainier. And after that, I have no idea what I'm doing. So that should be published within the next few months. And then after that, I just will be, who knows what the future will bring. So.
All right. Well, thank both of you guys, as always.
No problem.
Oh, you're very welcome. I love this.
All right. And they have part 8. Coming up next week, I believe we're going to have Jenny Ashford on, talking about the Rochdale Poltergeist. Later this month, we have Gordon White who will be joining us, who is the host of a podcast called Rune Soup, which is excellent and has a number of very interesting books out. We'll be talking to him probably for a couple of weeks. In August, we will have David Paulides back on, and a bunch of other interesting stuff in the works. www.wheredidtheroadgo.com for all your Where Did the Road Go needs.